Hello, this is Domenico with Economics, and we're going to continue discussing the concepts of economies of scale, but in this case, we're going to be looking at diseconomies of scale. In a previous video, we looked at this left side of the graph. We were looking at a coffee shop expanding over time, going from short-run average total cost curve number 1 to short-run average total cost curve number 2. And as they went from short run to long run, back to short run, expanding their coffee shop by getting a license to serve coffee on the sidewalk to provide their fourth, fifth, and sixth worker more space to operate, we saw that their cost on average fell as they increased output. And that is economies of scale, that as a firm in the long run expands in capacity and size, their cost on average falls. In this video, we're going to look at the right side of the graph, or the right side of the long-run average total cost curve, where the firm might be experiencing diseconomies of scale. And diseconomies of scale is focusing on a firm in the long run, expanding in size perhaps, but as they expand, they increase their quantity of output, but at the same time, unfortunately, they start to see that their costs on average are beginning to rise. And that could be a result of the firm just being too large for the entrepreneur to keep a close eye on. The entrepreneur maybe is very good at being able to manage and carefully watch the productivity of one or two locations, but once they get to several locations, then they might have to delegate those responsibilities to managers. And if the quality of those managers aren't that good in increasing the productivity of their workers, there might be some inefficiencies beginning to creep into the business. And the entrepreneur might actually not be aware of this because the business is just too large. So that's going to be the example that we're going to use. And we're going to start on, like I said, the right side of the graph at point A2 with short-run average total cost curve 3 with the supply curve S3 intersecting with the ATC curve at its lowest point. So this will be our starting point. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and analyze this as we would for a paper exam for the IB. As can be seen, we have a graph illustrating a firm, it could be a coffee shop, that is establishing diseconomies of scale as it expands. On the y-axis, we're measuring cost of production, and on the x-axis, oops, I should label this, we're measuring the quantity of output. So x-axis is the quantity of output. And we have an entrepreneur that has several locations. So it's a fairly large, perhaps coffee shop business or chain, perhaps. And we're operating along our supply curve S3, which is equal to the marginal cost curve 3. It intersects with the short-run average total cost curve at its lowest point, short-run average total cost curve number 3. So the firm is operating at point A2 with cost of production at CO1 and the quantity of output at Q1. This coffee shop, perhaps, as I mentioned before, is one of several owned by an entrepreneur who has had several years of experience owning and operating several coffee shops. And this particular coffee shop opens with 3 workers who have divided labor, and they're specializing to produce a quantity of output, as I mentioned, at Q1 with costs of production on average at CO1. All right? Thus, the firm is productively efficient since they're producing at minimum ATC. But in this location, demand begins to increase for the coffee being served and the food served at this coffee shop. So the entrepreneur decides to hire a fourth, fifth, and sixth worker. But due to the limitations of its fixed resources and limited space, the law of diminishing marginal return starts to set in, and that reduces the marginal productivity of each additional worker, leading to output increasing from Q1 to Q2, but cost on average rising from CO1 to CO2, or from point A2 to point B2 on the short-run average total cost curve. All right. Thus, at this point, at point B2, the entrepreneur has 2 choices. Number 1, they can fire the fourth, fifth, and sixth worker and return to point A2. That would mean reducing the quantity of output from Q2 to Q1, but it would have achieved costs falling from CO2 to CO1. Or the entrepreneur can expand the size of their coffee shop, and perhaps they get a license and they have the fourth, fifth, and sixth worker operating on the sidewalk to give them a little bit more space. All right. So if that's the case, they go from short run to long run, back to short run. Here they have their location plus the sidewalk. But in addition, the entrepreneur is also keeping an eye on many other coffee shop locations. But we noticed that now that the firm is operating at short-run average total cost curve number 4, with the supply curve S4 equal to the marginal cost curve 4, intersecting with the average total cost curve at its lowest point, minimum ATC, at point C2, that yes, although the firm has expanded, they see that the costs on average are rising from CO2 to CO3, while quantity of output is increased from Q2 to Q3. So here the firm is experiencing diseconomies of scale. As they increase output from Q1 to Q2 to Q3, costs on average are rising from CO1, CO2 to CO3. Now, why is this? Why is diseconomies creeping into a firm that is expanding over time? Number one, it could be due to coordination and monitoring problems. As a firm grows larger and larger, there may come a point where its management is running into difficulties of coordinating, organizing, cooperating, and monitoring their labor force to increase their productive efficiency. And as a result, perhaps units of labor workers notice that, and they can get away with degrees of productive inefficiencies, not working when perhaps they should be, because management is not able to keep a close eye, monitor, they're not able to coordinate their efforts among several locations, and so on. So that results in growing inefficiencies caused by ATC increasing as the firm is expanding. Another problem is, number two, communication difficulties. As a firm gets larger and larger and larger over time, there might be communication difficulties between different layers of management, from labor accurately communicating information to management, up into higher management, up to the entrepreneur. And as a result of the lack of communication or communication difficulties, it may take time for the entrepreneur or for the manager to recognize a problem, address it, and solve it. And so the inefficiencies, again, creep into the business. Another reason could be poor worker motivation. As a company becomes increasingly large, perhaps you have a labor force that feels like they're just a cog in the machine. That maybe they don't feel valued or appreciated by the entrepreneur or the manager, and they begin to lose motivation to perform at their best. In other cases, perhaps you have a large labor force that maybe feel bored at times at work, not motivated, not incentivized by management, or they care very little about their work, again, feeling like a cog in the machine. So they become less efficient over time, and the average total cost curves begin to rise. And fourth, there could be some external factors or causes that perhaps the entrepreneur does not have any control over, but it's leading to rising costs. Perhaps a larger firm builds a strong brand name, but when that large firm signs a contract for commercial space, because the owner of the commercial space knows that this is a large company with a significant brand, they can get away with charging higher rent. Let's say that you own a commercial space and you're going to charge Amazon versus some unknown little warehouse. You'd probably charge Amazon much more because you're aware that they have significant, let's say, supernormal profit. And so those higher rents can lead to rising average total cost curves. And in addition, there might be instances of a labor shortage. You might be unable to find skilled labor for particular tasks in your company, and you begin to compete against other firms to acquire that labor, and you offer higher wages to acquire them, and that causes your wages to go up, your labor costs to rise, and so on. So hopefully this is this is giving you a better understanding of the concept of diseconomies of scale, that as the firm expands and the increased output, why costs on average might be rising. And that's it. So I will provide an outline of the analysis of this in the information section of this video. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment, and don't forget to subscribe and to like. Thank you so much.